Tonight, let's slow things down and step into a world without alarm clocks, glowing screens, or electric lights. When the sun set in antiquity, how did people really sleep? Did they rest through the night, or did darkness bring an entirely different rhythm to daily life? In this video, we're exploring the sleep habits of people in antiquity, how ancient civilizations prepared for rest, where they slept, and how night itself shaped their routines. From candlelit evenings to quiet hours before dawn, their nights may feel strange or surprisingly familiar. If you enjoy calm, immersive history that helps you relax, please take a moment to like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more peaceful journeys into the past, and be sure to check out the related videos for more stories waiting just for you. Now get comfortable, unwind, and let's drift into the nighttime world of antiquity together. When the sun began to sink in the ancient world, it was not a romantic moment. No golden hour photos, no lingering strolls, no feeling that the day could stretch a little longer if you wanted it to. Sunset was a deadline. You could feel it approaching hours before it arrived. Shadows lengthened, the air cooled. Work slowed, not because people were tired, but because they were running out of usable light. Every task had to be finished before the world dimmed too far to see hands, tools, or faces. In antiquity, darkness did not arrive politely. It took over once the sun slipped below the horizon. Light drained away quickly. There was no glow from street lamps, no soft halo from windows, no background shine from cities miles away. The sky did not stay friendly for long. Twilight faded, shapes flattened, distances disappeared. The landscape became unfamiliar, even if you had walked it your entire life. This was the moment when the day ended, whether you were ready or not. People learned to live by the sun's schedule because they had no real choice. Fields were worked when light allowed it. Markets closed when faces became hard to recognize. Tools were set down not at a fixed hour, but at the point where mistakes became dangerous. Miss a step in daylight, you stumble. Miss a step in darkness, you break something. As night approached, there was a subtle tightening in behavior. Voices softened. Movements became deliberate. You did not rush at dusk. Rushing caused accidents. Instead, people wrapped up tasks carefully, knowing there would be no easy way to fix a mistake once darkness settled in. The psychological weight of nightfall was real. Modern people often imagine ancient life as simple or instinctive, but this moment carried tension. Night was not just the absence of work, it was the arrival of uncertainty. Once darkness fell, vision became unreliable. You could hear, smell, and feel far better than you could see. The world shrank to the range of your senses, and everything beyond that range became guesswork. And humans are not especially good at relaxing when they cannot see what might be approaching. In cities, the feeling was heavy but familiar. Buildings blocked the sky. Sounds echoed differently. Footsteps carried. A cough in the distance might belong to a neighbor, or to someone who did not belong there at all. In rural areas, darkness felt larger. Fields vanished. Tree lines dissolved into blackness. Animals moved without being seen. The night sky stretched overhead, vast and indifferent, full of stars that did nothing to help you find your way. The sudden stillness after dusk could feel unnatural. Daytime was full of noise, voices, tools, animals, carts, wind and movement. Night stripped much of that away. What remained felt sharper because there was less of it. A dog barking sounded louder. An owl sounded closer. Your own breathing sounded unnecessarily loud. This quiet was not peaceful in the modern sense. It was alert, quiet, the kind that makes you listen even when you would rather rest. People did not linger outdoors after dark unless they had a reason. Travel slowed dramatically. Roads that were safe during the day became risky at night. Not because something terrible always happened, but because something could, and that possibility mattered. Darkness blurred social order. You could not easily tell who someone was once. Faces vanished into shadow. Status symbols disappeared. Clothing lost detail. Even familiar people became silhouettes first, individuals second. This uncertainty shaped behavior. People gathered closer together as night fell. Families returned home. Groups stayed in groups. Solitude, which many of us now associate with peace, was something to be cautious about. There is a reason ancient stories fill the night with spirits, gods, and dangers. It was not just imagination. It was pattern recognition, filling in gaps left by poor visibility and limited control. The night felt alive because it was unreadable. Inside homes, the approach of darkness changed the rhythm of the household. Evening meals were timed carefully. Cleaning and preparation happened while light remained. Children were kept close. Animals were secured. No one wanted to be caught mid-task when sight failed them. This is something we forget now. We think of time as measured in hours and minutes. Ancient people measured it in light. When light ran out, so did options. Darkness also compressed life inward. Once outside became unreliable, attention turned to the interior world. Stories were told. Food was shared. Simple repairs were done near what little light remained. But even indoors, night did not disappear. Walls were thin. Roofs leaked sound. Homes breathed with the environment around them. Wind, rain, and distant noises passed through easily. You were never fully cut off from the dark. This transition from day to night happened every single evening, and it shaped expectations around sleep long before anyone lay down. Sleep was not something you slid into casually. It was something you prepared for, mentally and socially. You knew that once darkness settled, you would be less capable, less aware, and more exposed. That knowledge followed you as you moved toward rest. And yet, night was unavoidable. No matter how carefully the day was managed, darkness always arrived. People learned to respect it, not because they enjoyed it, but because resisting it was pointless. There is a quiet discipline in that acceptance. When the last usable light faded, there was a collective understanding. The world had changed modes. Activity gave way to caution. Effort gave way to preservation. The goal was no longer progress, but endurance. Get through the night. Wake up intact. Begin again. This mindset shaped how people approached sleep from the very beginning. Sleep was not an escape from the day. It was a strategy for surviving the night. And as the sky darkened completely, with no glow on the horizon and no gentle buffer between day and night, one truth became clear to everyone. Every evening, rest would happen in darkness that could not be controlled. And that meant rest would never be careless. The night had arrived. When darkness finally settled in, people did not fight it with brightness. They couldn't. They pushed back with fire. And fire, as it turns out, is a very imperfect ally. In the ancient world, light did not fill a room. It survived in small pockets. A flame here, a glow there. Darkness still owned most of the space, patiently waiting just beyond the edge of vision. Fire was comfort, yes, but it was also work. Every bit of light had to be earned. Oil had to be pressed or traded for. Wicks had to be made. Wood had to be gathered, dried, carried, and guarded. Keeping a flame alive through the evening was a small, ongoing labor, not a switch you casually flipped on. And because light was costly, it was used carefully. Most homes relied on a single hearth fire or a few oil lamps at most. These did not brighten corners. They did not reach ceilings. They did not banish shadows. Instead, they created islands of visibility surrounded by uncertainty. You could see the faces nearest to the flame. Everything else existed in suggestion. Shadows moved constantly. A flicker of the fire could stretch a shape across the wall, then snap it back again. Objects changed size. Familiar spaces looked unfamiliar. The human brain, always eager to fill in gaps, did not always choose comforting explanations. Firelight soothed, but it also played tricks. Smoke added another layer. Many ancient homes were poorly ventilated by modern standards. Fires smoked. Lamps smoked. The air was often hazy, especially in winter when doors stayed shut. Eyes burned, throats scratched. Light softened even more as it passed through the haze. And yet, people stayed close to the flame, because without it, the night pressed in immediately. Fire marked the boundary between safety and exposure. Within its glow, you could prepare food, tend to children, repair tools, or simply sit and exist. Outside that glow, the night took over completely. This made evenings intimate by necessity. People clustered together, not out of sentimentality, but because it made sense. One fire could warm and light several bodies. Spreading out would have been wasteful and uncomfortable. Light created gravity. It also created limits. Once the fire was low or lamps burned down, activity stopped. Reading was rare, not only because books were scarce, but because light was insufficient. Fine work became impossible. Even conversation slowed as faces faded into darkness. Eventually, there was nothing left to do near the fire except wait. This is where modern imagination often gets things wrong. We picture ancient nights as warmly lit interiors full of glow. In reality, most nights were dim, uneven, and partially obscured. Light never fully claimed the space, and fire carried risks. A hearth left unattended could burn a home down. An overturned lamp could start a fire that spread faster than anyone could respond. Entire neighborhoods could be lost while people slept. This was not theoretical. It happened often enough to shape behavior. So fire demanded attention even as it provided comfort. Someone had to tend it. Someone had to watch it. Someone had to decide when it was safer to let it die than to keep it going. This decision was made nightly, and it shaped the rhythm of sleep. Let the fire go too early, and the cold crept in. Let it burn too long, and danger increased. The result was a careful compromise. Fires were banked, not extinguished completely. Embers were preserved. Lamps were placed where they were less likely to tip. Light was reduced gradually, not abruptly. Darkness was allowed to return slowly. Firelight also shaped how people understood the night itself. Beyond the glow, sounds felt closer. Movements felt intentional, even when they weren't. A mouse sounded larger. The wind felt deliberate. Light gave the illusion of control, but only within its small reach. This created a particular emotional state, calm but alert, relaxed but listening. People did not sink into distraction. They remained aware of the space beyond the fire, even if they could not see it. Sleep began long before eyes closed. It began in the dimming of light and the narrowing of focus. There is also something quietly humbling about firelight. It reminds you that human comfort is fragile. One gust of wind, one careless movement, and the flame flickers or disappears. The night does not negotiate. Ancient people understood this deeply. They did not expect light to obey them. They worked with it, respected it, and accepted its limits. This acceptance shaped expectations around rest. You did not demand perfect conditions. You adapted to what was available. If light was low, you rested sooner. If the fire failed, you adjusted. There was no frustration about this. It was simply how evenings worked. And perhaps most importantly, fire marked the transition from public life to private survival. During the day, the sun belonged to everyone. At night, your fire belonged to your household, or your group, or whoever you trusted enough to share its warmth. Fire drew boundaries. Inside the circle of light were people you knew. Outside were possibilities you didn't need to think about too much, as long as the flame held. This is why night gatherings were quiet, not because people were tired, but because noise felt unnecessary and unwise. Loud voices traveled. Silence conserved energy. Stillness felt safer. The fragile glow encouraged softness. As the evening wore on, light diminished further. Flames lowered. Shadows claimed more space. The room seemed to grow larger, even as activity shrank. Eventually, firelight stopped being the center of attention and became background reassurance, a small glow, a quiet crackle, enough to know you were not alone in the dark, but never enough to forget the dark was there. This fragile relationship with light shaped how sleep was approached. Sleep did not begin in total darkness, nor in full illumination. It happened in a twilight state, where fire still breathed softly and shadows moved without meaning. The night was not defeated. It was negotiated with, and in that negotiation, people learned to rest not deeply, not recklessly, but carefully, always within reach of the fire, always aware that light was temporary. Because when the flame finally faded, the night reclaimed everything, and it always would. If you were to walk into an ancient home at night, the first thing you would notice is not the bed, because most of the time, there wasn't one, at least not in the way we think of beds now. Sleep in antiquity did not happen in a special, carefully designed room meant only for rest. There were no mattress stores, no matching bed frames, no expectation that sleep required furniture at all. People slept where it made sense. Sometimes that meant a corner of the main room, sometimes near the hearth, sometimes wherever there was space that night. The idea of a permanent sleeping location was flexible, not fixed. Most people slept on the floor. This sounds uncomfortable to modern ears, but it was normal. Floors were packed earth, wood, or stone. To soften them, people used straw, reeds, animal skins, woven mats, or simple pallets. These could be rolled out at night and put away during the day. The space did double duty. By day, it was for work and eating. By night, it became a place to rest. Nothing about the arrangement was sentimental. Sleep was practical. You lay down where you were warmest, safest, or closest to the people you needed. Wealth changed things, but not as much as we might expect. Elite households sometimes had raised beds or couches used for reclining and sleeping. These were still not plush. They were wooden frames with straps or ropes, topped with thin mattresses stuffed with wool, straw, or feathers if you were very lucky. Even then, These beds were often in shared spaces. A Roman domus, for example, had rooms, but they were multi-purpose. A sleeping couch might sit in the same space used for receiving guests earlier that day. Bedrooms, as private retreats, were rare. Most sleeping areas were communal by design. One room, several bodies. This was not seen as strange. It was efficient. Body heat mattered. Proximity meant safety, and space was limited. For poorer households, everyone slept together. Parents, children, sometimes extended family, infants were kept close. Elderly relatives were nearby. Privacy was a luxury that most people did not expect. And interestingly, this closeness was not always about affection. It was about logistics. If a child woke in the night, someone needed to hear it. If a fire shifted, someone needed to notice. If danger appeared, waking together mattered. Separate rooms would have made that harder. Inns, when they existed, were even more communal. Travelers shared floors, benches, or simple platforms. You slept next to strangers, sometimes very close to strangers. Your belongings stayed with you, because there was nowhere else to put them. Ships were worse. Sailors slept wherever space allowed. On deck, below deck, near cargo, near ropes. You learned to sleep around movement, noise, and discomfort. If you waited for ideal conditions, you simply did not sleep. Monasteries and barracks followed similar logic. Rows of beds or pallets, no dividers, no curtains, everyone visible, everyone accountable. Sleep was structured, not private. This arrangement shaped how people understood rest. Sleep was not a personal bubble, it was a shared state. You were aware of others even while resting. Breathing, shifting, murmuring. These sounds were normal. Silence, the kind we chase now, was not expected. And then there is the question of posture. People did not always sleep flat on their backs. Side sleeping was common. Slightly upright positions were encouraged in some cultures, especially after meals. Pillows existed, but they were small, firm, and sometimes made of wood or stone. Yes, stone pillows. They were shaped to support the neck, not comfort the head. Comfort was not the goal. Alignment was ancient advice, often warned against sleeping too deeply or too comfortably. Rest was meant to restore, not overwhelm the body. Which brings us to the absence of bedrooms. The modern bedroom is a dedicated space designed for relaxation, separation, and identity. None of that applied in antiquity. Rooms were defined by use in the moment, not by permanent labels. At night, the household transformed, furniture shifted, mats appeared, people rearranged themselves. Sleep was an activity layered on top of daily life, not separated from it. This meant that waking was gradual. You did not emerge from a sealed room into a different world. You simply opened your eyes and continued where you left off. There is something quietly grounding about that. The boundaries between sleeping and waking, private and shared, were softer. You were never fully alone with your thoughts. There was always someone nearby, breathing, shifting, reminding you that rest was a collective act. Of course, this also meant discomfort. Someone snored, someone kicked, someone woke early. These things were accepted. There was no expectation of uninterrupted sleep. If rest came in pieces, that was fine. Even among the wealthy, sleep was not indulgent. Large houses echoed. Servants slept nearby. Night sounds traveled easily. Privacy was relative. And perhaps most importantly, sleeping spaces were chosen with danger in mind. You slept where you could hear the door, where the fire was visible, where children could be reached quickly, where escape was possible if needed. Comfort was secondary. This may sound harsh, but it also removed pressure. No one expected perfect rest. No one blamed themselves for waking. Sleep was something you did when you could, as best you could, and maybe that made it easier. Because when you lie down knowing the floor will be hard, the room will be shared, and the night will interrupt you, you stop demanding more from sleep than it can give. You let it happen. In these spaces, simple, flexible, communal sleep became part of life rather than an event that had to be optimized. You rested not because conditions were ideal, but because your body needed it. And the body, it turns out, is very adaptable. Where people slept shaped how they slept, lightly, attentively, in pieces, with others. The night was never fully shut out, and neither were the people sharing it with you. This was not deprivation. It was normal, and for centuries, it worked. If there is one idea that feels most strange to modern ears, it is this. Most people in antiquity did not sleep alone. Not sometimes, not occasionally, almost never. Sleeping alone was unusual. impractical, and in some cases, suspicious. For most of human history, sleep was a group activity, not in a social way, in a survival way. You slept near other people because that was how nights were managed. Families slept together by default. Parents, children, infants, and sometimes grandparents all shared the same space. This was not seen as crowded. It was seen as normal. Everyone belonged where they could be seen, heard, and reached. A child waking in the night did not cry into silence. Someone was already there. A sick person did not struggle unnoticed. A bad dream did not stay private for long. Modern parents might call this exhausting. Ancient parents called it practical. Infants especially were kept close. Separate nurseries did not exist. Babies slept beside their mothers or within arm's reach. Night feeding, comforting, and checking were built into the shared sleeping space. This closeness was not framed as emotional bonding. It was framed as necessity. Babies needed attention. Parents needed to hear them. Distance solved nothing. Children grew up expecting other people nearby at night. Silence was not comforting. It was unsettling. As children aged, they did not graduate into private rooms. They simply took up slightly more space in the same shared area. Everyone adjusted. Someone always did. Even among the wealthy, sleep was rarely solitary. Larger homes meant more people, not more privacy. Servants slept nearby. Guards slept near entrances. Household members stayed within earshot. A wealthy Roman might have a private chamber, but it was still part of a larger structure filled with others. Doors were thin. Sounds carried. The idea of complete isolation at night was still rare. Privacy, as we define it, was not the goal. In fact, sleeping alone could be risky. If something happened in the night, illness, fire, intrusion, there would be no one to notice until morning. Being unseen meant being vulnerable. This is why travelers rarely slept alone if they could avoid it. Inns were shared spaces, large rooms filled with bodies. You slept where you found space, sometimes on the floor, sometimes on benches, sometimes sitting up if there was no room to lie down. Was it comfortable? No. Was it safer than sleeping outside alone? Yes. You kept your belongings close. You slept lightly. You woke often. This was expected. No one complained about bad sleep. That was just sleep. Ships followed the same logic. Sailors slept in groups. Proximity meant warmth, communication, and faster response to trouble. If the ship shifted suddenly, everyone needed to move. Barracks were even more structured. Soldiers slept in rows. No one disappeared into the night unnoticed. This created discipline, but it also created a shared rhythm. Sleep and waking were collective experiences. Monasteries took this idea and made it spiritual. Monks slept in communal dormitories. Silence was enforced, but solitude was not. The presence of others was meant to support vigilance and humility. You were never alone with your thoughts for too long, and that was the point. Even in rural settings, where space was abundant, people clustered together at night. One room was easier to heat. One room was easier to watch. One room meant fewer unknowns. Sleeping separately would have been wasteful. Why heat two spaces when one would do? Why divide attention when danger did not divide itself politely? This closeness also shaped how people understood the body. Sleep was not private behavior. Snoring was normal. Talking in sleep was unremarkable. Restlessness was shared. You learned early that bodies make noise at night, and that this was nothing to be embarrassed about. The modern anxiety about disturbing others did not exist in the same way. Everyone disturbed everyone else, a little, and then everyone went back to sleep. There is also something important here about trust. To sleep near someone is to trust them at your most vulnerable. In shared sleeping spaces, trust was not optional. It was assumed, enforced by social bonds and necessity. Even sleeping near strangers followed rules. You kept to yourself. You respected space as much as possible. You stayed alert enough to protect yourself if needed. Sleep did not mean unconsciousness. It meant reduced awareness, not absence of it. This is why ancient sleep was often lighter than modern sleep. Not because people were anxious, but because their environment demanded responsiveness. Someone might need to wake quickly, and often someone did. Privacy, when it existed, was layered, not absolute. A curtain, a corner, a slight distance. Enough to mark difference, not enough to create isolation. The idea of retreating into a sealed room, closing the door, and disappearing from everyone else's awareness would have felt strange, possibly unsafe, possibly selfish. Night was not a time to withdraw from the group. It was a time to stay close. There is a quiet social intelligence in this. When everyone sleeps together, care becomes automatic. You notice changes. You sense problems early. You respond without needing alarms or devices. Of course, this also meant compromise. Someone always wanted the warmer spot. Someone always took up more room. Someone always woke earlier than everyone else. These were minor frustrations, accepted without much thought. Complaining would not change the arrangement, so people adapted instead. And adaptation was the skill that mattered most. Over time, shared sleep shaped emotional expectations. You were used to presence, used to breathing nearby, used to soft sounds in the dark. Total silence, if it happened, would have felt wrong. It is worth pausing here, because this challenges a very modern assumption that good sleep requires being alone. For most of history, the opposite was true. Being alone made sleep harder, not easier. Safety was social. Warmth was shared. Awareness was collective. Sleep was not an escape from others. It was something done with them. And maybe that is why ancient people worried less about sleep quality. They did not expect perfection. They expected interruption. They expected noise. They expected presence. Sleep worked around life, not the other way around. As night deepened, bodies shifted together. Someone turned. Someone sighed. Someone reached out in sleep and touched a familiar arm or shoulder. These small signals reminded everyone that they were not facing the night alone. And in a world where darkness carried real uncertainty, that mattered more than comfort. Much more. Sleep, in antiquity, was rarely solitary. And because of that, it was rarely fragile. It bent. It adjusted. It returned. Together. At some point in the night, something curious happened. People woke up. Not because of noise, not because of fear, not because something was wrong. They woke up because that was how sleep worked. In the ancient world, sleep often came in two parts. A first sleep, then a waking pause, then a second sleep. This was not considered unusual, broken, or unhealthy. It was simply the night doing what it always did. People would go to sleep not long after darkness settled. Not immediately, but soon enough. Once the fire was low, conversation faded, and the body felt ready. People lay down and drifted into their first sleep. This first sleep was usually deep. The body, tired from physical labor and daylight effort, sank quickly. Muscles loosened. Breathing slowed. The mind let go. This was the most restful part of the night, the kind of sleep that feels heavy and solid. And then, hours later, people woke up, gently, naturally, without panic. Eyes opened in the dark, or near dark. The fire was embers now. The room was quiet, but not silent. Others stirred too. Not everyone at once, but enough that this waking felt shared. This was the middle of the night, and no one thought it was strange. This waking period could last anywhere from a few minutes to an hour or more. People did not jump out of bed and start chores, but they also did not lie there anxious, wondering why they were awake. They expected it. Some people stayed lying down, eyes open, listening. Others sat up slowly. Someone might add a piece of wood to the fire. Someone might step outside briefly. Someone might whisper. This was a soft time, a suspended time, because the body was rested, but the night was not finished. During this interval, people did quiet things. Nothing energetic, nothing loud. Activities matched the mood of the hour. Prayer was common, not dramatic prayer. Simple prayer, repeating familiar words, thanking, asking, reflecting. The night felt closer to the divine. And this pause between sleeps felt like a good moment to speak. Others talked quietly, short conversations, observations, thoughts that felt too small or too strange for daytime. The kind of things you say when the world is still and you don't feel rushed. Some people reflected silently. The mind wandered. Problems were turned over gently. Dreams from the first sleep were remembered and considered. This was also a time when people might tend small needs, check on animals, visit the latrine, adjust bedding, care for a child who had woken. Nothing about this was hurried. The night allowed for it. Then, when the body felt ready again, people returned to sleep. The second sleep. This sleep was usually lighter, more dream-filled, easier to wake from. It carried people toward dawn, rather than away from the day. The rhythm made sense. The body rested deeply, woke briefly, then rested again until morning. Modern people often hear this and think something is wrong. We are trained to believe that waking at night means failure, insomnia, a problem to fix. Ancient people did not think this way. Waking was part of the plan. There was no clock on the wall telling you that you had slept enough or not enough. There was only how you felt, and whether the night was still dark. And because there was no pressure to stay asleep, waking did not become stressful. You did not spiral into worry. You did not count hours. You did not calculate productivity. You simply existed in the middle of the night for a while. This pattern appears across cultures and centuries. Different words were used, but the structure repeats. First sleep, second sleep, the space between. Even language reflected it. People referred to events happening after first sleep or before second sleep, as casually as we might say around midnight. The night had texture. This also meant that sleep did not have to carry everything. You did not expect 8 uninterrupted hours to solve all fatigue. Rest came in stages. If one part was shorter, the other might stretch. There was flexibility built in. It is worth noting that this pattern aligned well with the environment. Without bright artificial light, the body responded more strongly to natural darkness. Melatonin rose earlier. Sleep came sooner. The waking pause matched the deepest part of the night. The body followed cues it understood, and because nights were long, especially in winter, there was room for this rhythm. You were not trying to squeeze rest into a narrow window between obligations. The night belonged to itself. There is also something emotionally important here. That middle waking time was not lonely. Remember, people slept together. When you woke, someone else was often already awake, or would be soon. You were not alone with your thoughts. If you whispered, someone might answer. If you prayed, others might be doing the same. If you sat quietly, you were sitting quietly together. This reduced anxiety. Thoughts felt shared, even when they weren't spoken. The night did not isolate you. It held you. Of course, not everyone woke at exactly the same time. Sleep was individual, but the expectation of waking meant that if you did open your eyes, you did not feel abnormal. You did not think, why am I awake? You thought, this part. There is a small kindness in that. Modern sleep culture often demands performance. Fall asleep fast, stay asleep, wake refreshed. Anything else feels like failure. Ancient sleep asked less. It accepted interruption. It allowed pause. It assumed variation. And because of that, people did not fight their own bodies. They worked with them. This does not mean ancient people were perfectly rested. They were often tired. Life was physically demanding. Sleep conditions were imperfect, but they did not add extra stress by expecting sleep to be something it wasn't. The first sleep did the heavy lifting. The second sleep carried you gently toward morning. The waking space connected the two. It was a rhythm learned through experience, not instruction. When dawn approached, the second sleep ended naturally. Light crept in, sounds returned. Someone stirred, another followed. The day reassembled itself piece by piece, and no one thought to say, I woke up in the middle of the night, so I slept badly. They had slept the way humans often did, in 2 acts, with an intermission, and that intermission, far from being a flaw, was simply part of the story of the night. The middle of the night was not empty. It just moved more slowly. After the first sleep loosened its grip, the world entered a quieter state, not awake, not asleep, something in between. This was the pause that most modern people never experience on purpose. The fire was low now, not gone, just reduced to a soft glow. The room felt larger in the dark, edges blurred. Time stopped feeling precise. This was the hour when people were most aware and least busy. Waking in the middle of the night did not come with urgency. No one checked the time. No one worried about how long they had been asleep or how long they had left. There was only the sense that the body had surfaced for air. Breathing felt deeper. Thoughts felt slower. Some people stayed lying down, eyes open, watching shadows shift as embers settled. Others sat up carefully so they wouldn't disturb those still sleeping. Movement was deliberate. Nothing was done suddenly. This was not the hour for work. It was the hour for tending. Someone might add a small piece of wood to the fire, not to brighten the room, just to keep it alive. The flame flared briefly, then settled again. Enough warmth, enough light. Animals were checked during this time. Livestock needed occasional reassurance. A sound outside might prompt someone to listen more closely. Most of the time, it was nothing. But the habit of checking mattered. The night rewarded attentiveness. Spiritual practices fit naturally into this pause. Prayer, meditation, recitation, whichever form belief took. This was when it felt closest. The world was quiet. Distractions were gone. The boundary between human thought and something larger felt thin. This did not mean dramatic religious experience. It was often repetitive and calm. Familiar words spoken softly. The kind of prayer that steadies rather than excites. For people who did not pray, Reflection filled the space. The mind wandered differently at night. Problems felt less urgent. Memories surfaced. Dreams from the first sleep lingered and were considered. Was that image meaningful? Was it a message? Or just the mind sorting itself out? Ancient people did not dismiss dreams casually. They paid attention to them, especially when waking directly from one. This pause allowed room to remember before the second sleep blurred everything again. Quiet conversations sometimes happened too. Not long discussions, short exchanges, a comment, a reassurance, a shared observation about the night. Voices stayed low, instinctively. Loudness felt out of place. This was also when bodies adjusted. Bedding was rearranged. A child who had shifted too far was pulled back closer. Someone found a more comfortable position. Small aches were noticed and soothed. It was a moment of maintenance. The middle of the night was practical in ways that daytime never needed to be. You addressed what mattered quietly and left the rest alone. There is something important here about control. During the day, people tried to shape the world. They planted, built, traded, traveled. At night, especially in this hour, shaping gave way to acceptance. You did not try to conquer the dark. You coexisted with it. This is why the night was often described as liminal, a threshold, a space between states. Not fully living, not fully resting, not sacred exactly, but not ordinary either. And because it existed outside normal productivity, it carried less pressure. If you were awake, you were awake. If you were tired, you rested. If thoughts came, you let them come. No one expected the middle of the night to accomplish anything. That expectation alone made it restful. Of course, vigilance was still present. This was the hour when guards stayed alert, when sailors listened for changes in wind, when households remained aware of fire and sound. Alertness did not mean anxiety. It meant readiness. You could be calm and still prepared to respond. This balance is difficult for modern people. We tend to swing between total relaxation and total stress. Ancient knights lived in the middle ground. The body learned to rest without fully letting go. There is a subtle humor in this too. People today lie awake at night worrying about sleep itself. Ancient people lay awake and thought, yes, this again. They knew this space. They recognized it. They did not argue with it. And because they did not resist it, it often passed gently. Eventually, drowsiness returned. Not all at once. It crept back in slowly. Thoughts thinned. Muscles softened. Someone yawned quietly. Someone shifted and settled. The fire dimmed further. This was the signal. Not a clock. Not an alarm. Just the body saying it was time to drift again. People lay back down if they had risen. Eyes closed. Breathing slowed. The second sleep took hold. Lighter than the first, but still sufficient. The middle of the night faded without ceremony. What is striking is how little conflict existed around this pause. No one felt robbed of rest. No one blamed themselves for waking. No one tried to force sleep. The night was allowed to have its shape. Modern sleep advice often tells us to eliminate wakefulness, to smooth out irregularity, to optimize efficiency. Ancient sleep did the opposite. It built wakefulness into the system. This did not make people less rested. It made them less anxious. The middle of the night belonged to no one and demanded nothing. It existed simply because bodies and darkness made space for it, and perhaps that is why it felt safe. When dawn was still hours away, and the world lay quiet and unreadable, this pause offered something rare, a moment to exist without expectation. No productivity, no urgency, no performance, just breath, warmth, and the knowledge that sleep would return when it was ready. The night did not rush itself, and neither did the people living inside it. In that still hour, between first sleep and second, ancient people were not restless or broken or failing at rest. They were simply awake. And then, gently, they weren't again. Ancient people thought about sleep very differently than we do. They did not ask, did I get enough? They asked, did my body settle? Sleep was not measured in hours. It was judged by how the body felt afterward, light or heavy, calm or unsettled, ready to move, or still slow and stiff. The body was the authority. In Antiquity, the body was believed to be a system that needed balance more than efficiency. Sleep was one of the tools for maintaining that balance, but it was not the only one. Food, movement, temperature, emotions, and even seasons all mattered just as much. Sleep was part of a larger equation. Many ancient cultures believed the body was governed by internal fluids or forces that had to stay in harmony. In the Mediterranean world, this took the form of humoral theory. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, each associated with temperature, moisture, and temperament. You did not need to understand the details to follow the advice. The message was simple. Sleep affected your internal balance. Too little sleep dried the body out. Too much sleep made it sluggish. Sleep at the wrong time could disturb digestion or mood. So people were careful, but not obsessive. Sleeping too long was often discouraged, especially after sunrise. It was thought to dull the senses and weigh the body down. Rising late suggested laziness or imbalance, not because of morality, but because it meant the body was not responding properly to daylight. On the other hand, missing sleep entirely was seen as dangerous. A body that never fully rested could not regulate itself. It overheated, it weakened, it became vulnerable to illness. The goal was moderation. Ancient medical texts offered advice on when to sleep, how to sleep, and even how to position the body. Some suggested sleeping on the right side first to aid digestion, then turning to the left. Others warned against sleeping flat on the back for too long. Pillows were used to support alignment, not comfort. A supported neck was considered healthier than a soft head. Comfort was secondary to structure. This might sound unpleasant, but the expectation was different. Sleep was not meant to feel luxurious. It was meant to restore function, and restoration did not require softness. Sleep was also closely tied to digestion. Large meals were eaten earlier in the evening when possible. Sleeping immediately after heavy eating was discouraged. The body needed time to process food before rest could be effective. This is one reason evenings were slow. There was a natural wind-down period before the first sleep. Eating, sitting, talking, and then resting. No one scrolled through anything. There was nothing to scroll. The body moved gradually towards sleep, rather than being pushed into it. Temperature mattered too. Cold was thought to slow the body excessively. Heat was thought to agitate it. People adjusted bedding and sleeping location depending on the season. In winter, sleep clustered closer to the fire. In summer, people moved away from it. Sometimes sleeping outdoors was preferable when heat lingered inside. Again, flexibility mattered more than routine. Sleep was not treated as a rigid schedule. It was treated as a response. If the body felt heavy early, you slept early. If restlessness lingered, you stayed awake longer. If you woke in the night, you accepted it. There was no idea of forcing sleep. The body was also believed to be more open during sleep. Vulnerable, yes, but also receptive. This is why dreams mattered. This is why certain foods, emotions, or activities were avoided before bed. Strong emotions were thought to disturb sleep. Anger, fear, grief. People understood, without modern psychology, that the mind carried daytime experiences into rest. So evenings were often kept calm when possible. Arguments were discouraged at night. Heavy discussions were postponed. The night was not the time to stir the body up. This was not always achievable. Of course, life was hard. Anxiety existed. Hunger existed. Pain existed. But the ideal remained. Let the body settle before rest. Sleep was also seen as a form of digestion itself. Just as food was broken down in the stomach, the day was broken down in sleep. Experiences were processed. Fatigue was redistributed. The body repaired what it could. This is why oversleeping was sometimes criticized. Too much sleep was thought to trap the body in this inward state for too long. You needed to re-engage with the world to stay healthy. Balance. Again, there is a quiet practicality to all this. No one expected sleep to be perfect. No one believed it solved everything. It was simply one of the body's tools. If you slept poorly, you adjusted the next day. You rested more during pauses. You went to bed earlier the next night. You did not spiral into worry. Sleep was part of a rhythm that included waking, working, eating, resting, and returning again. Modern people often separate mind and body when thinking about sleep. Ancient people did not. The body's signals were trusted. If sleep was light, it meant something. If dreams were intense, it meant something. If waking came early, it meant something. Not always something dramatic. Often just that the body was doing its job. And here is the part that may surprise modern listeners. Ancient people did not expect to feel amazing after sleep. They expected to feel capable. Stiffness was normal. Mild fatigue was normal. Full alertness came after movement, food, and daylight. Sleep did not promise transformation. It promised continuation. This removed a great deal of pressure. When you do not expect sleep to fix everything, you do not resent it when it doesn't. You use it, thank it, and move on. Even illness was approached this way. Sleep helped, but it was not magic. Recovery took time. The body worked gradually, not overnight. In many ways, ancient sleep culture trusted the body more than modern sleep culture does. There were fewer rules, fewer measurements, fewer goals. You listened, you adjusted, you lived. There is also something humbling here. The body was not expected to bend to human plans. Humans bent to the body. If sleep came early, the evening ended early. If wakefulness came at night, it was allowed. If the body needed rest during the day, it found it. Life adapted around physical reality. Perhaps that is why sleep felt less stressful. It was not a test to pass. It was not a performance. It was not tracked, optimized, or judged. It was simply something the body did when conditions allowed. Ancient people did not romanticize sleep. They respected it. They knew it was necessary. They knew it was imperfect. They knew it was shaped by everything else in life. And so they worked with it, not against it. Sleep and the body were partners, not enemies. And that partnership, imperfect and practical, carried people through nights that were far darker than anything we face now, without complaint, without panic, and without expecting more than sleep could ever promise. When ancient people slept, they did not leave the world behind. They entered another version of it. Dreams were not treated as random noise or mental leftovers. They were experiences, events, sometimes small and forgettable, sometimes important enough to change decisions, delay journeys, or alter lives. You did not wake from a dream and say, "That was weird." You asked, "What was that telling me?" In antiquity, dreams were often understood as messages, not always clear ones, not always pleasant ones, but meaningful ones. The sleeping mind was believed to be open in a way the waking mind was not. During sleep, defenses lowered, distractions faded, the body rested, and the soul or spirit, or mind, depending on the culture, wandered more freely. This made sleep a risky time, but also a valuable one. Dreams could come from gods, from ancestors, from the body itself. Sometimes all three were thought to overlap. Not every dream mattered. Ancient people knew the difference between a fleeting image and something that stayed with you. A dream that lingered, repeated, or arrived with strong emotion was treated with caution and curiosity. Those dreams were not ignored. In some cultures, dreams were actively sought. People prepared for sleep carefully, hoping to receive guidance. They avoided certain foods. They performed rituals. They slept in specific places believed to be more receptive. This was not desperation. It was strategy. If the gods spoke in dreams, then sleep was a doorway worth approaching thoughtfully. Dream interpretation became its own discipline. Manuals existed. Lists of symbols and meanings were recorded and passed down. A snake might mean one thing, water another. Falling, flying, being chased. These were not just sensations, they were coded language. Of course, interpretations varied. A dream of fire could mean danger, purification, or transformation depending on context. The dreamer's age, health, and circumstances all mattered. Dreams were not read literally, they were weighed. Professional dream interpreters existed in some societies. You could consult someone more experienced, someone who had studied patterns. They listened carefully, asked questions, and offered guidance. This might sound strange now, but consider this. Ancient people had far fewer sources of information. Dreams were one of the few places where uncertainty could be explored symbolically. They took advantage of that. Dreams were also connected to illness. A troubling dream could be an early sign that something was wrong in the body. Fever dreams in particular were watched closely. They were not dismissed as meaningless. They were signals. This made sleep both restorative and revealing. But not all dreams were welcomed. There was a fear of sleeping too deeply. Deep sleep was not always seen as healthy. It could leave you open to harmful dreams or to forces that might disturb the soul. Waking during the night, especially between first and second sleep, was sometimes seen as protective. It kept the boundary from dissolving too completely. This is one reason the waking pause mattered so much. It was a chance to surface, to reorient, to reassert control before returning to rest. Dreams often arrived during the second sleep, when rest was lighter and the mind more active. People noticed this. They remembered more dreams from this part of the night, and they trusted those memories. You did not jump out of bed and dismiss a dream. You sat with it. You thought about it. You discussed it if it seemed important. Dreams were social. Someone might say, "I dreamed of water last night," and others would listen. Not because they expected entertainment, but because dreams could matter to everyone. A warning dream might affect the household. A favorable dream might change plans. This did not mean people lived in constant superstition. There was discernment. Many dreams were acknowledged and then set aside. Just a dream was a phrase that existed even then, but the option for meaning was always there. Dreams also provided a way to process fear without confronting it directly. In a world where danger was real and control was limited, dreams allowed the mind to rehearse, symbolize, and release tension. Modern psychology would recognize this immediately. Ancient people didn't have that language, but they had the experience. And then there is the simple fact that nights were darker and quieter. With fewer distractions, dreams arrived with more clarity. They felt vivid. They stayed with you. When you wake in total darkness, a dream can feel closer to reality. There is no immediate flood of information to wash it away. No screens, no clocks, no notifications, just the memory, still warm. This made dreams harder to ignore. Humor existed here too, quietly. People knew that dreams could be ridiculous. Strange combinations, absurd imagery, a donkey talking, a house floating, a friend behaving oddly. Not every dream was sacred. Some were laughed off the next morning. Clearly, I ate too much. Someone might say, ancient people were not humorless, but even nonsense dreams were accepted as part of sleep. They were not pathologized. No one worried that a strange dream meant something was wrong with them. Dreams were simply something the mind did when it was allowed to wander. What mattered was how you responded. If a dream caused fear, you might pray. If it caused confusion, you might seek advice. If it caused calm, you might be grateful. The dream did not define you, it informed you. There is also something important about how dreams fit into communal sleep. When people slept together, they heard each other speak in dreams. Murmurs, words, sounds. This was normal. Sleep talking was not embarrassing. It was just the body expressing itself. People did not record it. They did not tease endlessly. They noticed, and then they let it go. Again, less pressure. Dreams were not private property in the way we treat them now. They were experiences that could be shared or kept quiet, depending on their weight. There was no expectation that every dream be analyzed, or that no dream should be. Choice mattered. And here is a subtle but important point. Because dreams were expected, they were less frightening. When you anticipate something, it has less power to disturb you. Modern people often wake from dreams, startled, confused, or anxious. Ancient people woke and thought, ah, that happened. Familiarity softens impact. Dreams did not invade sleep. They belonged to it. This perspective also made bad dreams easier to tolerate. Nightmares happened. Everyone had them. They were unpleasant, but not catastrophic. You might wake shaken. You might talk about it. You might pray or perform a small ritual. And then you went back to sleep. You did not lie awake wondering what it said about your mental health. Dreams were part of the night's texture, like sounds or shadows. Sometimes meaningful, sometimes just passing through. And because sleep itself was not expected to be perfect, dreams did not need to be either. In many ways, ancient people were more at ease with the unconscious than we are now. They did not demand silence from the mind. They listened when it spoke, and ignored it when it rambled. They trusted that meaning would repeat itself if it mattered. The rest could fade with the dawn. As the night moved toward morning, dreams softened, images blurred, light crept in. The waking world returned, and with it, practical concerns. Some dreams were carried into the day. Most were not, and that was fine. Sleep had done its work. The night had spoken, quietly or not at all, and the body, having rested and wandered, prepared to rise again. Dreams did not rule ancient lives, but they were never dismissed as meaningless either. They occupied the same space as sleep itself, respected, imperfect, and deeply human. A message sometimes, a murmur often, and always part of what it meant to rest in a dark world that still had things to say. When the sun went down in the ancient world, it did not politely hand things over to light switches and street lamps. It simply left, and in its place came fire. Small fire, careful fire, fire that demanded attention like a nervous child. This was the only real line people had between themselves and the dark. Firelight was not a glow that filled a room. It did not push the night away. It barely held it back. An oil lamp could light a small circle, maybe the width of a table. A hearth fire lit faces, knees, and hands, but left corners untouched. Shadows stayed sharp. Darkness pressed close, just beyond the flame, waiting. Most nights were far darker than we imagine today. Movies love to show ancient cities glowing warmly at night, torches lining the streets, windows shining like stars. That is fantasy. Real fire cost time, labor, and fuel. Oil had to be pressed, wicks trimmed, wood chopped and dried. Every flame burned something precious, so people used as little light as possible. Many homes had one lamp, some had none. A single flame was often shared by an entire household. It stayed near the hearth, where cooking happened and people gathered. Bedrooms, if you can call them that, stayed dark. Moving at night meant knowing your space by memory. You counted steps, you reached for walls, you shuffled instead of walked. Stubbed toes were common, so were bruises. Nobody rushed. Firelight changed how night felt. It made everything move. Shadows stretched and shrank. Faces flickered. A hanging pot looked like a crouching animal. Smoke curled upward and stung the eyes. The smell of oil or wood clung to hair and skin. Light was never clean or steady, and fire could fail. A gust of wind through a doorway could snuff a lamp in seconds. Oil could run out. A wick could drown itself. Then you were blind. Fully blind, not dim, not cozy. Blind in a way modern eyes almost never experienced. Relighting a flame was work. You needed embers, or flint, or a neighbor who still had fire. Losing fire meant vulnerability, cold, fear, delay. That is why hearth embers were guarded carefully, banked under ash before sleep. Fire was tucked in, just like people were. But even when it burned, fire was never enough to make night safe. It did not reach outside. It did not stop animals. It did not stop thieves. It did not stop thoughts. Firelight gave comfort, but it also reminded people how small that comfort was. Beyond the circle of light was everything unknown. Sounds without shapes, movement without form. A cough in the dark sounded closer than it was. A footstep echoed longer. Silence itself felt loud. This is why many ancient evenings ended early. Not because people were tired, but because staying awake past a certain point gained you nothing. You could not read easily. You could not work well. You could talk quietly. You could think. You could worry. So most people let the fire die down and let the dark take over. Sleep came sooner, but not deeper. Fire also shaped how people slept together. A shared flame pulled bodies into the same space. Families clustered near warmth. Travelers slept close for safety. Even strangers preferred company when the light was weak. Darkness made people social in ways daylight did not. There was also danger in fire itself. Houses burned easily. Roofs were often thatch or wood. A spark could ruin everything, so fires were watched even at night. Someone stayed half awake. Someone listened for the crackle that sounded wrong. Someone knew how to smother flames fast. This made sleep lighter. Ears stayed open. Bodies rested. But part of the mind stayed on duty. Fire demanded respect. It was friend and threat at the same time. There is a strange humor in this. If you look closely, humans spent the whole day racing the sun, then spent the night babysitting a tiny flame that barely did its job. All this effort just to exist between dusk and dawn, and yet that small light mattered deeply. Fire gave rhythm to the night. When it dimmed, voices softened. When it flared, people leaned in. Stories were told near it. Prayers were whispered beside it. The last faces seen before sleep were lit by it. Firelight framed memory. For children, fire meant reassurance. For elders, it meant continuity. For everyone, it meant morning was possible. So when ancient people lay down to sleep, the dark was not empty. It was shaped by the last glow of embers, by the smell of smoke in the air, by the knowledge that light existed, even if it was weak and temporary. Fire did not defeat the night. It negotiated with it, and that negotiation shaped how people rested, dreamed, and endured until dawn. In the next chapter, we move closer, past the fire, into the spaces where bodies actually lay down. Because once the light faded, where you slept mattered more than how. If you were to step into an ancient home at night, the first thing you'd notice might not even be a bed. Because, for most people, there wasn't one. At least, not like the beds we think of today. No raised frames, no fluffy mattresses, no separate bedroom decorated for calm. Sleeping was practical, not luxurious. Most people slept on the floor. Sometimes it was just packed earth, sometimes wooden planks, sometimes stone. To soften the surface, people added straw, reeds, animal skins, or thin mats. That was it. Comfort was relative. The point wasn't indulgence, it was rest. You laid down where you could, and you adjusted as needed. The sleeping area doubled as daytime space. The same corner used for cooking or weaving became the sleeping spot at night. Some people slept near the hearth to stay warm, others closer to the door for safety. Sleep didn't happen in isolation. It It happened where it made sense. Shared sleeping spaces were normal. Families clustered together, parents, children, sometimes extended relatives. Privacy, in the modern sense, didn't exist. Infants slept close to their mothers. Children learned to wake with minimal fuss. Everyone was nearby in case of danger, fire, or illness. In a world where night could be threatening, being alone was risky. Even wealthier households rarely offered solitude. Roman elites might have raised beds or couches, sometimes in small rooms, but servants often slept nearby, and doors were thin. The idea of a private bedroom was rare. Beds were functional wooden frames with straps or ropes, topped with straw, wool, or feathers if fortune allowed. Comfort was still secondary to support and safety. In inns, travelers shared floors or benches with strangers. Ships forced sailors to sleep wherever space allowed on deck, below deck, near cargo. Exhaustion, noise, and close quarters were part of life. Barracks and monasteries followed similar patterns, rows of beds, mats, or pallets. Sleep was communal and structured. Sleeping arrangements shaped behavior. There was little expectation of perfect rest. Snoring, shifting, murmuring, these sounds were normal. People learned to sleep lightly, because waking might be necessary. You didn't demand silence from the night. You worked with its rhythm. Posture mattered too. Sleeping flat on your back wasn't always recommended. Side sleeping, or slightly upright positions, were often advised. Pillows existed, but they were small and firm, sometimes wood or stone, intended to support the neck, not cradle the head. Comfort was functional, not indulgent. The absence of dedicated bedrooms meant sleep blended seamlessly with life. He did not retreat from the world. He drifted into rest in spaces shared with family, animals, or others. Waking was gradual. You emerged from sleep without a stark transition between rest and activity. This shared sleep had psychological effects. The presence of others provided comfort, safety, and warmth. You weren't alone in darkness. At the same time, bodies learned to rest lightly, attuned to the movements and breathing of others. Sleep became a skill, adjusted to circumstances. Sleeping spaces were also chosen with danger in mind. You slept where you could hear the door, where the fire could be monitored, where children could be reached. Comfort came second to safety. But there was a subtle reward. Fewer expectations reduced anxiety. Sleep was accepted as it came, with interruptions and all. Even when conditions were harsh, the body adapted. People slept in pieces, lightly or deeply, depending on the hour and in close proximity to others. Sleep was a collective act. It was practical, it was human, and it worked. The floor, the mats, the shared room, these were not signs of deprivation. They were the stage for rest in a world where night was not yet tamed. Bodies rested, minds wandered, dreams arose, and together, humans endured the long, dark hours before dawn. In these spaces, sleep was never a solitary pursuit. It was social, responsive, and resilient. And that resilience carried people through nights far darker and less predictable than anything most of us have ever known. Sleep in antiquity was not the same every night of the year. It stretched and shrank with the seasons, like everything else. People did not fight the calendar, they moved with it. In winter, the nights were long, really long. The sun dipped early, sometimes before dinner was even finished. Darkness came slowly, then stayed, and people followed it without complaint. When the light faded, work faded too. There was no reason to stay up late, no glowing screens, no electric lamps buzzing in the corner, just firelight, which made shadows dance and eyes grow heavy. So winter sleep began early, much earlier than what we would call normal today. After eating, talking, maybe mending clothes, or telling a story, people lay down, not because they were lazy, because there was nothing left to do that required seeing, and they slept longer, not always deeply, not always perfectly, but longer. The body took advantage of the dark. More rest meant more warmth, less hunger, less movement. Winter was about conservation. Sleep was part of survival. Agricultural life reinforced this rhythm. Fields were quiet. Tools rested. There was no planting to rush, no harvest to save before rot. Winter work existed, but it moved slowly. So sleep stretched to match it. People might wake during the night. They often did, but there was no panic about it. They knew the night was still theirs. Then spring arrived, and sleep changed again. Days grew longer. Light returned earlier, gently, almost shy at first. With it came work. Soil needed turning. Animals needed care. The body adjusted without discussion. Bedtimes drifted later. Wake times crept earlier. Sleep shortened, not because anyone decided it should, but because the sun decided first. By summer, sleep was something else entirely. The heat made rest harder. Nights could be sticky, restless, loud with insects and distant animals. People tossed, they shifted, they slept lighter, and they accepted it. Summer sleep was often broken. Shorter nights meant less darkness. The body did not sink as deeply. Early dawn arrived fast, sometimes too fast. In hot regions, people adapted. They rested during the day when possible. Short naps, moments of stillness. Shade was valued more than speed. This was not called being unproductive. It was called being alive in summer. Agricultural rhythms shaped everything. Farmers rose early when the air was cool. Midday heat slowed work naturally. Evening brought a second wave of activity before darkness returned. Sleep bent around labor, not the other way around. No one tried to force 8 perfect hours into a schedule that nature clearly ignored. Mood followed the seasons too. Winter sleep felt heavy, cocoon-like, long hours under blankets, shared warmth, slow breathing. The mind turned inward. Stories lasted longer. Silence felt deeper. Summer sleep felt thin, quick, light, sometimes frustrating, sometimes filled with half-dreams and sweat and distant sounds. People did not label this as a problem. They saw it as weather, but inside the body, seasonal changes in sleep were expected, even welcomed. There was no idea that sleep should feel the same in January and July. That idea would have sounded strange, like expecting the same crops year-round. And then there was autumn, the quiet reset. Days shortened, harvest ended. The body slowly prepared for longer nights again. Autumn sleep was often described as satisfying. Cool air, full bellies, tired muscles. Sleep came easier, deeper, without effort. This cycle repeated every year across generations. Children grew up knowing it. Elders trusted it. No one asked, "Why can't I sleep like I did last month?" They knew the answer already, because the world had changed, so they had to. The night sky itself played a role. Clear winter skies felt endless. Summer nights were alive with movement and sound. Moonlight could turn a room silver. Stars were companions, not distractions. Seasonal sleep shaped dreams as well. Long winter nights invited long dreams. Summer dreams were short, sharp, sometimes forgotten before morning. Even emotions followed the pattern. Winter brought heaviness, but also calm. Summer brought energy, but also restlessness. None of this was medicalized. No one tracked it. No one tried to fix it. Sleep was not a performance, it was a response. The body listened to the earth more than the clock, and the earth was a very clear communicator. If the nights were long, you rested long. If the nights were short, you rested lightly and often. If sleep came and went, that was fine too. There was comfort in knowing that next season would bring a different kind of rest. So when we talk about ancient sleep, we should not imagine one perfect pattern. There was no single way to sleep correctly. There was only rhythm, slow, predictable, cyclical. Sleep rose and fell like the sun itself. Not optimized, not measured, just lived. And in that quiet agreement between body and season, people rested the way the year asked them to. Not more, not less. Just enough for that moment in time. Sleep in antiquity was not the same every night of the year. It stretched and shrank with the seasons, like everything else. People did not fight the calendar, they moved with it. In winter, the nights were long, really long. The sun dipped early, sometimes before dinner was even finished. Darkness came slowly, then stayed, and people followed it without complaint. When the light faded, work faded too. There was no reason to stay up late, no glowing screens, no electric lamps buzzing in the corner, just firelight, which made shadows dance and eyes grow heavy. So winter sleep began early, much earlier than what we would call normal today. After eating, talking, maybe mending clothes, or telling a story, people lay down, not because they were lazy, because there was nothing left to do that required seeing, and they slept longer, not always deeply, not always perfectly, but longer. The body took advantage of the dark. More rest meant more warmth, less hunger, less movement. Winter was about conservation. Sleep was part of survival. Agricultural life reinforced this rhythm. Fields were quiet. Tools rested. There was no planting to rush, no harvest to save before rot. Winter work existed, but it moved slowly, so sleep stretched to match it. People might wake during the night. They often did, but there was no panic about it. They knew the night was still theirs. Then spring arrived, and sleep changed again. Days grew longer, light returned earlier, gently, almost shy at first. With it came work. Soil needed turning. Animals needed care. The body adjusted without discussion. Bedtimes drifted later. Wake times crept earlier. Sleep shortened, not because anyone decided it should, but because the sun decided first. By summer, sleep was something else entirely. The heat made rest harder. Nights could be sticky, restless, loud with insects and distant animals. People tossed, they shifted, they slept lighter, and they accepted it. Summer sleep was often broken. Shorter nights meant less darkness. The body did not sink as deeply. Early dawn arrived fast, sometimes too fast. In hot regions, people adapted. They rested during the day when possible. Short naps, moments of stillness. Shade was valued more than speed. This was not called being unproductive. It was called being alive in summer. Agricultural rhythms shaped everything. Farmers rose early when the air was cool. Midday heat slowed work naturally. Evening brought a second wave of activity before darkness returned. Sleep bent around labor, not the other way around. No one tried to force 8 perfect hours into a schedule that nature clearly ignored. Mood followed the seasons too. Winter sleep felt heavy, cocoon-like, long hours under blankets, shared warmth, slow breathing. The mind turned inward. Stories lasted longer. Silence felt deeper. Summer sleep felt thin, quick, light, sometimes frustrating, sometimes filled with half-dreams and sweat and distant sounds. People did not label this as a problem. They saw it as weather, but inside the body, seasonal changes in sleep were expected, even welcomed. There was no idea that sleep should feel the same in January and July. That idea would have sounded strange, like expecting the same crops year-round. And then there was autumn, the quiet reset. Days shortened, harvest ended. The body slowly prepared for longer nights again. Autumn sleep was often described as satisfying. Cool air, full bellies, tired muscles. Sleep came easier, deeper, without effort. This cycle repeated every year, across generations. Children grew up knowing it. Elders trusted it. No one asked, "Why can't I sleep like I did last month?" They knew the answer already, because the world had changed, so they had to. The night sky itself played a role. Clear winter skies felt endless. Summer nights were alive with movement and sound. Moonlight could turn a room silver. Stars were companions, not distractions. Seasonal sleep shaped dreams as well. Long winter nights invited long dreams. Summer dreams were short, sharp, sometimes forgotten before morning. Even emotions followed the pattern. Winter brought heaviness, but also calm. Summer brought energy, but also restlessness. None of this was medicalized. No one tracked it. No one tried to fix it. Sleep was not a performance, it was a response. The body listened to the earth more than the clock, and the earth was a very clear communicator. If the nights were long, you rested long. If the nights were short, you rested lightly and often. If sleep came and went, that was fine too. There was comfort in knowing that next season would bring a different kind of rest. So when we talk about ancient sleep, we should not imagine one perfect pattern. There was no single way to sleep correctly. There was only rhythm, slow, predictable, cyclical. Sleep rose and fell like the sun itself. Not optimized, not measured, just lived. And in that quiet agreement between body and season, people rested the way the year asked them to. Not more, not less. Just enough for that moment in time. In antiquity, sleep changed, not just with seasons, but with age. The night belonged to everyone, but everyone used it differently. Children slept close, very close. Infants rarely slept alone. They were tucked beside parents, siblings, or grandparents, sometimes all in one bed, sometimes on mats close enough to reach out and touch. This wasn't about parenting philosophy. It was practical. Babies needed warmth. They needed feeding during the night. They needed reassurance when the dark felt too big. Night crying was answered quickly, not debated. No one waited to see if the baby would self-soothe. The baby soothed the household by being soothed. Children drifted in and out of sleep easily. They fell asleep early. They woke during the night. They slept again without much ceremony. The night was not strict. It bent around small bodies. Older children stayed awake longer, listening to adults talk. Stories mattered. So did laughter. Sleep arrived when it arrived. Elders experienced the night differently. As people aged, they often woke earlier, sometimes much earlier. before the sky changed color, before the animals stirred. This was expected, even valued. Early rising elders became quiet guardians of the morning. They tended fires, prepared food, watched over sleeping households. Their lighter sleep was not treated as a flaw. It was a shift. Families understood that sleep changes over a lifetime. No one tried to force elders to sleep like the young. No one shamed them for waking early. Care moved both directions. Elders helped children sleep. Children helped elders rest. If someone woke sick, anxious, or frightened, they were not alone. Night care was a shared responsibility. Someone always heard you stir. The household breathed together. Different rhythms, one space. Sleep was not private. It was communal, and that closeness softened the night. Fear had less room to grow. Even in antiquity, sleep did not always come. People lay awake. They worried. They hurt. They listened to hunger or pain or thoughts that refused to be quiet. Insomnia was not new. It was just named differently. Causes were familiar. Anxiety over crops, fear of illness, cold nights, empty stomachs. Illness disrupted sleep often. Fever brought strange dreams. Pain pulled people in and out of rest. But there was no expectation of perfect sleep. No one stared at the dark thinking, "I'm failing at sleeping." They simply thought, "I'm awake," and that mattered. When sleep failed, people responded gently. Herbs were common: chamomile, poppy, valerian. Nothing aggressive, just calming. Prayers were whispered, not always to ask for sleep, but for peace. Rituals mattered: rearranging bedding, changing position, listening to the fire. Sometimes people got up. They ate something small. They spoke quietly. They waited. Wakefulness was not an emergency. It was part of the night. There was no pressure to force sleep. And without pressure, sleep often returned on its own. If it didn't, that was okay too. Rest did not always mean unconsciousness. Lying still, breathing slowly, being warm and safe, that counted. People trusted that tomorrow would still come, even if the night was restless. And usually, it did. There is a special kind of silence just before morning. In antiquity, this hour was well known. The deepest part of the night had passed. Dreams grew lighter. The body began to float upward. The sky shifted almost imperceptibly. Stars dimmed. Darkness thinned. This was the final phase of sleep. Gentle, fragile, often filled with half-dreams. Roosters stirred. Not loudly yet. Just enough to remind the world that morning was coming. Early risers woke without hurry. They lay still, listening. The fire had burned low. Ash glowed faintly. Breath was slow and even around the room. This hour belonged to laborers, bakers, watchmen, people whose work began before sunrise. But even they moved softly. No sharp motions. Nusadan noisy. The body anticipated the day before the mind did. Muscles woke first. Thoughts followed. This was not a jolt. It was a glide. The quiet before dawn was respected, not rushed, not interrupted unless necessary. It was the night letting go. No bells, no buzzing, no sudden commands. In antiquity, waking was gradual. Light was the main signal. It crept in through cracks and doorways. Soft at first, then clearer. Sound followed. Animals, footsteps, distant voices. People woke in layers, not all at once. Some sat up slowly. Some stayed lying down, watching the ceiling brighten. Some spoke quietly before standing. There was no sharp line between sleeping and waking. No countdown. Morning routines were calm, stretching, drinking water, stirring embers back to life. The body eased into movement. Because waking was not violent, it was less stressful. The nervous system had time to catch up. People were tired sometimes, but not shocked awake. This mattered more than we realize. Modern sleep is different. Artificial light changed everything. Night became optional. Darkness became avoidable. Sleep grew isolated. Rooms separated. Doors closed. Efficiency replaced rhythm. We gained privacy. We gained control. We gained the ability to stay awake longer than our bodies prefer. We also gained anxiety about sleep, counting hours, tracking cycles, worrying about quality. In antiquity, sleep was not something to optimize. It was something to live through. This is not nostalgia. No one wants hunger or cold or illness back. But perspective matters. Ancient sleep reminds us that variation is normal, that rest does not always look perfect, that wakefulness is not failure. We lost the idea that the night is a companion, not an enemy. If there is one thing that might surprise modern listeners, it's this. Almost nobody in antiquity slept alone. Not sometimes, not occasionally, almost never. Sleeping alone was unusual, impractical, and sometimes even suspicious. Families, servants, travelers, and soldiers all clustered together at night, not for closeness as we think of it, but for survival. Being near others meant someone would notice if danger came, if a child cried, or if the fire started to die. Families slept together. Parents, children, sometimes grandparents, all in the same space. Infants were within arm's reach of their mothers. Private rooms were rare. Privacy itself was a luxury that most people didn't expect. If you were alone, you were vulnerable. And let's be honest, in a world where darkness was genuinely threatening, being alone felt foolish. Communal sleep extended beyond the household. Travelers slept in inns where strangers were packed like sardines on the floor. Sailors slept in shifts aboard ships. Soldiers slept in rows in barracks. Even monks in monasteries slept in dormitories. The principle was the same everywhere. Safety in numbers, warmth in numbers, vigilance in numbers. Noise was normal. Snoring, muttering, shifting, all of it. People slept lightly because they needed to wake if necessary, but they slept together because it was easier to survive that way. Privacy, if it existed, was symbolic. A curtain, a corner, a small separation. Otherwise, everyone shared the rhythm of night. Sleeping close also shaped how people perceived comfort. Warmth, sound, and presence were valued far more than softness or luxury. Someone stirring in the night wasn't a disruption. It was reassurance. Bodies learned to adapt, breathe, and rest together. The night was a communal act. At some point after dusk, people went to sleep. But sleep was rarely one uninterrupted block. Most people in Antiquity practiced segmented sleep. The first sleep, a waking period, and then the second sleep. The first sleep came after the evening's work was done and the fire was low. People fell into a deep, heavy rest. Muscles relaxed, breathing slowed, dreams floated in and out. And then, hours later, they woke naturally. Not startled, not panicked, just awake. This middle-of-the-night waking could last from a few minutes to an hour or more. Some stayed in bed, thinking or reflecting. Some got up, tending fires, checking animals, or whispering quietly. This pause was expected. No one worried. It was a natural part of the night. Afterward, people returned to the second sleep, lighter and more dream-prone, which carried them toward dawn. Sleep in segments allowed the body to rest deeply, wake gently, and rest again. Modern sleep science even recognizes the benefits of this rhythm, though most of us never practice it intentionally. Segmentation gave people flexibility. Nights were long in winter, and this rhythm let the body adjust without stress. Wakefulness was not a failure. It was a built-in feature of human rest. Ancient people accepted their bodies instead of resisting them. The middle of the night was a liminal space. You weren't fully asleep, nor fully awake. This pause was quiet, slow, and deliberate. The fire was dim, embers curling softly. Shadows stretched across the walls, and sounds seemed closer in the darkness. People used this time practically. Fires were tended, children were checked, animals were monitored. Some prayed, others reflected quietly on the day, or recalled dreams from the first sleep. Conversations, if they happened, were hushed. Even when no one did anything, the hour had value. It trained alertness, patience, and presence. Sleep was not an escape. It was an ongoing interaction with the night. The body and mind adapted naturally, without clocks, alarms, or expectation. Eventually, drowsiness returned. People lay back down. The second sleep carried them toward dawn. And in the middle of the night, the pause itself became part of the rhythm of life, a gentle, shared acknowledgement that the dark had its own rules. Sleep in Antiquity was considered a bodily function, closely tied to health and balance. Ancient medical systems, like humoral theory in the Mediterranean, emphasized harmony between body fluids and external conditions. Sleep was neither sacred nor indulgent. It was restorative. Sleeping positions mattered. Side sleeping was recommended to aid digestion. Pillows were firm, intended to support the neck, not to cradle the head. Heavy meals were avoided before bed. Firelight and ambient temperature were adjusted for comfort without excess. Oversleeping was discouraged, not as a moral judgment, but because it disturbed bodily balance. Sleeping too lightly, or waking often, was seen as natural and even protective. Sleep was measured by how the body felt afterward, not by hours logged. The body was trusted. Sleep followed natural cues, darkness, tiredness, and seasonal rhythms. People did not obsess over sleep quality. They accepted it as imperfect but essential. Rest was practical, rhythmic, and deeply human. Dreams were treated as messages, not random images, not meaningless chatter of the brain, but experiences with significance. Dreams could be divine communication, warnings, reflections of bodily health, or early signs of illness. Some cultures prepared for dreams. Rituals, careful food choices, and sleeping locations were all thought to influence them. Professional dream interpreters existed. Symbols mattered. A snake might warn of danger. Water could signal change. Interpretations were nuanced and contextual. Dreams were social, too. In shared sleeping spaces, murmured words or noises could be interpreted. Sleep talking was normal. Nightmares were acknowledged but not dramatized. The middle of a night waking offered time to reflect on dreams before returning to the second sleep. Dreams, like sleep itself, were imperfect and human. They mattered without dictating life. The night carried them gently, and the body rested even as the mind wandered. If we imagine ancient nights as silent, we're wrong. They were full of sound, but not mechanical sound. No cars, no electricity, just the world doing its thing. Animals filled the dark. Owls, crickets, dogs, and livestock. Wind rustled leaves, rain tapped roofs, and streams murmured in the distance. Human noises were subtle but constant. Breathing, murmuring, coughing, shifting in bed. Even snoring was part of the rhythm. City nights were different. Footsteps echoed in alleys. Fires crackled. Doors creaked. Voices floated softly. Rural nights were quieter but alive with wildlife. People attuned themselves to these sounds. Some were warnings, most were ordinary. The auditory environment shaped alertness, comfort, and community awareness. Noise was part of shared sleep. Sleep was not about perfect silence, it was about listening and resting simultaneously. Sleep was a negotiation with risk. Darkness was real. Animals prowled, thieves crept, fires went out, homes could burn. Being unconscious was dangerous. People slept lightly. They took shifts, consciously or unconsciously. Guards stayed alert. Parents monitored children. Even in private homes, ears remained attuned to small noises. Sleep demanded vigilance. Vigilance did not mean panic, it meant readiness. You could rest while still sensing the environment. Firelight, proximity to others, and routine checking allowed bodies to relax without being completely unaware. Sleep was surrender, but a careful surrender. Trust in others, social cohesion, and practical preparation made it possible. Vulnerability was balanced by collective responsibility. Sleep was not a retreat. It was a strategic, adaptive act. And in that awareness, there was safety and, even a quiet kind of peace. Sleep outside the home was rarely comfortable. Soldiers slept in barracks, on rough pallets or bare floors, often wearing some part of their armor. Sailors rested wherever the ship had space on deck, under cargo, or in cramped bunks. Travelers slept in inns, on shared mats, or under the open sky. Rest was provisional, fragile, earned. Rotating watches were common. Someone always remained awake to observe danger, enemy movement, fire, storms, or thieves. Sleep was never complete. A soldier's nap could be interrupted by a shout. A sailor's rest might end with the creak of rigging. Travelers often woke at unfamiliar sounds, ready to respond. Yet people adapted. Even on uneven floors or wooden benches, the body found ways to rest. Exhaustion softened discomfort. Sleep was lighter, yes, but it allowed survival. The shared nature of these arrangements offered security. Someone else's presence meant danger might be noticed, fire tended, or a threat warded off. There was humor in necessity, too. Soldiers squashed together in tight quarters, sailors tangled in ropes, travelers trying not to kick their neighbors. Bodies adjusted to proximity with ingenuity. Blankets were shared, boots removed, elbows negotiated. Sleep was a social skill as much as a bodily one. Despite all the interruptions, these people slept, not perfectly, not luxuriously, but enough to rise and continue. Sleep was practical. Sleep was earned. And in a world without artificial light or strict schedules, the night gave what it could, whether on battlefield, deck, or roadside. Sleep changed with the seasons. In winter, nights were long, often 15 or more hours. People went to bed earlier, rose later, and segmented sleep stretched over a longer period. The first sleep came soon after darkness, the waking pause in the middle of the long night, and the second sleep carried toward dawn. Summer was different. Nights were shorter, temperatures higher. People slept less deeply. moved more, and adjusted bedding to avoid overheating. Light lingered longer, and the body followed. Evening work or socializing extended later into the night, but heavy, uninterrupted sleep was harder to achieve. Agriculture shaped these rhythms. Harvest time demanded early mornings and late nights, leaving little room for sleep beyond what the body could snatch in stages. Winter, conversely, allowed more rest, reflection, and even the ceremonial use of long nights for prayer, storytelling, or quiet conversation. Seasonal rhythms also affected health. Rest aligned with daylight and temperature helped maintain balance in body and mind. Ancient people intuitively synced sleep to nature, rather than imposing artificial schedules. The night dictated its pace, and humans adjusted. Age shaped sleep patterns. Infants slept frequently, and often with caregivers. Shared sleep offered warmth, safety, and quick response to needs. Children woke in the night without concern. They were tended to naturally, without alarm. Elders often woke earlier. Their sleep was lighter, sometimes fragmented. They adapted by resting during the day if necessary. Families understood these differences. Sleep was communal, accommodating various needs and rhythms. This intergenerational pattern meant the night was not isolating. Everyone had a role: care, presence, awareness. The body's needs were recognized and respected. Sleep became a shared experience, shaped by age, necessity, and human connection. Insomnia existed in antiquity, just as it does today. Causes were practical: hunger, illness, worry, or environmental discomfort. Remedies included herbs, prayers, rituals, adjusting fire and bedding, or simply accepting wakefulness. Failure to sleep perfectly was not shameful. It was expected at times. People did not add stress by trying to force rest. They accepted interruption, treated the body gently, and prepared for the next opportunity. This acceptance reduced anxiety. Sleep was never a test. Rest could be partial, segmented, or light, and it still served its purpose. Wakefulness was incorporated naturally into the night's rhythm. As the night approached its end, darkness began to soften. Embers faded, roosters crowed, and the sky hinted at light. This was the final phase of sleep, the gentle slide toward waking. People rose gradually. Early risers, laborers, and household members stirred first. Others remained in the last moments of second sleep. The body anticipated day, stretching, adjusting, preparing. The quiet before dawn was soft and reflective. It was not rushed, not alarmed. The night released its grip gently. Rested or lightly slept, humans emerged slowly into morning, carrying fragments of dreams, comfort from fire, and the rhythm of shared sleep. In antiquity, waking was gradual. There were no blaring bells, no buzzing phones, no harsh lights demanding attention. Instead, the body sensed light, sound, and social cuisine responded in its own time. The first hints of dawn crept into rooms slowly. A faint glow on the horizon, a soft change in the air, or the distant crow of a rooster signaled the approaching day. People stirred naturally, stretching limbs, yawning, adjusting bedding, and listening to those around them. Sound guided waking, children moving, animals stirring, the crackle of embers in the fire. These small noises shaped consciousness without urgency. Even in shared rooms, the body had time to transition. Light, heat, and familiar sounds worked together to pull people gently out of sleep. This natural waking reinforced the segmented rhythm of the night. No one woke with panic. No one felt abruptly thrust into consciousness. The body and mind remained aligned, alert enough to respond if needed, but calm enough to ease into the day. Modern people often struggle with this. We rely on artificial signals that demand immediate attention. Ancient people, by contrast, woke in harmony with the environment, with the household, and with their own bodily rhythms. Waking was gentle, unhurried, and, in many ways, restful. Compared to ancient sleep, modern rest is profoundly different. We have artificial light, heated homes, alarm clocks, smartphones, and privacy, but we've also gained anxiety, sleep pressure, and the expectation of perfect rest. Artificial light extends our days. It lets us work, scroll, watch, and play long past natural sunset. Solitary sleep offers privacy and comfort, but also isolation. Sleep, anxiety, insomnia, and guilt about waking are modern maladies, largely unknown in antiquity. We've gained efficiency and convenience. We've lost rhythm and attunement to nature. We've made sleep measurable, stylized, and sometimes stressful. Ancient sleep was responsive. communal, segmented, and unfiltered. Modern sleep is often rigid, solitary, and fraught with expectation. This is not to romanticize the past. Ancient people faced genuine danger. Their nights were darker, longer, and more vulnerable. But their approach to rest was adaptive. Sleep fit the body, the household, and the world. There was acceptance, there was patience, there was resilience. By understanding what was lost and gained, we gain perspective. Not nostalgia, not prescription, but insight. The night shapes life, and sleep shapes the body. We can respect that, even with modern luxuries, by remembering its rhythm, patience, and imperfection. As the fire dies, embers fading into ash, a household rests, darkness settles, breathing slows. Sleep returns in stages, in rhythms, in shared patterns that span generations. Night is not an enemy. It is companion, teacher, and space for the body to recover. Sleep once was practical, communal, and attuned to nature. It was segmented, responsive, sometimes interrupted, and never judged for imperfection. It carried dreams, shadows, whispers, and the quiet vigilance of the human body. Tonight, as you prepare to rest, imagine that world. Darkness is not threatening. Fire is small but constant. Sleep arrives in rhythm with the body and the environment. Segmented or deep, communal or solitary, it works. You do not need to chase it. You do not need to perfect it. Breathing slows. Muscles soften. The night has done its work. You are part of a long human lineage of sleepers who rested, dreamed, woke, and moved on, adaptable, resilient, alive. Sleep is not luxury. Sleep is life. And for a few hours, as humans once did, you belong entirely to it. In the ancient world, the moment the sun dipped below the horizon was nothing like what most of us experience today. There were no street lamps, no soft electric glow, no glowing screens to keep the edges of our world visible. Darkness didn't creep in politely. It arrived all at once, pressing against the walls, rolling across the landscape, and turning familiar streets and fields into unknown territory. Sunset was a daily deadline. Work, chores, trade, and travel all needed to wrap before nightfall. Farmers had to be back in their homes, animals safely penned, tools stored, fires prepared. Merchants shut their stalls, and craftsmen extinguished their forges. People measured time by the movement of the sun, and the sudden absence of light was more than a shift in color. It was a change in reality itself. The first hint of dusk came gradually, painting the sky in shades of orange, purple, and deepening blue. But that brief beauty was deceptive. The moment the last rays disappeared, the world transformed. The familiar became strange. Shadows lengthened and merged. Paths that were obvious in daylight suddenly seemed uncertain. Sounds carried farther and closer at the same time. A crow's call echoed differently. A branch cracking in the distance made the heart jump. Darkness sharpened the senses without mercy. Work rhythms were strictly tied to daylight. There was no night shift, no extended evening productivity. People organized their lives around light because survival depended on it. Night meant inactivity, preparation, and vigilance. The body, tuned for daytime labor, began to slow as darkness approached. Muscles loosened, eyes strained to catch the last hints of shapes. Even conversation softened, as if the very act of speaking might attract attention from unseen dangers lurking just beyond perception. Psychologically, darkness was heavy. Modern people often think of night as a neutral backdrop, a canvas for relaxation or entertainment. But in antiquity, night was active. It demanded respect. It was a space where dangers were real, both human and animal. Wolves, bears, thieves, and hostile neighbors could move unseen. Fire, noise, and presence were the only shields against uncertainty. Darkness was not absence, it was presence, and it required vigilance. People experienced the sudden stillness after dusk in a way we can barely imagine. The transition from the noisy, bustling day to near silence was profound. The world didn't hum softly. It stopped. The air thickened. A village that had been filled with children playing, livestock braying, and merchants calling their goods suddenly felt suspended in a kind of tense anticipation. The quiet was so complete it pressed on the chest, made hearts beat a little faster, made ordinary shadows seem ominous. Yet humans are adaptable. Ancient people adjusted to this rhythm with routines, rituals, and small comforts. Lamps and torches were lit for practical tasks, fires stoked in hearths to provide warmth and a tiny circle of illumination. But even these flames were fragile and temporary, barely keeping back the dark. The light emphasized the shadows rather than banishing them. It made shapes dance on walls, created illusions, and reminded everyone of the world that existed just beyond their vision. The onset of darkness shaped not just behavior but imagination. Stories, myths, and rituals often centered on the night. Spirits, gods, and supernatural forces were tied to darkness. Sleeping or traveling after sunset carried symbolic and practical weight. People didn't just fear the unknown, they respected it. A walk after dusk was purposeful. A conversation after sunset was measured. Even laughter softened, as if to avoid attracting attention. Night was also social. Firelight brought families and neighbors together. Tasks that could be done by the light of a single flame mending clothes, sharpening tools, preparing food became communal. Conversations were hushed but meaningful. A shared glance, a whispered comment, or a quiet story could provide reassurance in a world where the smallest sound might hint at danger. Yet, despite all precautions, darkness remained threatening. People moved slowly, memorized spaces, counted steps, and adjusted their actions to compensate for what they could not see. Even the smallest error, stripping over a mat, stepping on a tool, misjudging a doorway, could cause injury. And beyond physical mishaps, there was the constant mental pressure of the unknown. Who or what might be out there? How close? How dangerous? This is why night required courage. Not heroism, not the kind sung in epics, but quiet, ordinary courage. To lay down for sleep, knowing that outside the hearth's circle, anything might happen, demanded a calm awareness, a practical acceptance of risk, and trust in family, fire, and the body's instincts. Courage, in this sense, was mundane but essential. People learned to live with partial information. They could not see everything, hear everything, or control everything. They relied on routines, community, and subtle cues. The sound of the wind in the trees, the distant bark of a dog, the faint rustle of an animal. Their senses were finely tuned to the nuances of darkness. They did not fear blindly, they interpreted the night constantly, adjusting posture, proximity, and vigilance in response. Sleep itself was embedded in this context. People did not expect to drift into unconsciousness with abandon. They lay down near fire or companions, in positions that allowed movement and awareness, ready to wake at a sound. The first sleep and the second sleep, rituals, and segmented rest all emerged as adaptations to the night's demands. Sleep was practical, not indulgent. It was negotiation, compromise, and survival. Yet there was something profoundly human in it. Even under pressure, even in darkness, people found calm. They settled, adapted, and rested. Firelight danced on faces. Families murmured softly. Stories carried meaning and humor. The night, for all its danger, offered reflection, quiet, and shared experience. Humans became attuned to its rhythms and mysteries. Darkness in antiquity was total, vivid, and alive. It shaped perception, behavior, and imagination. It demanded attention and courage. It framed the day and influenced the body's natural cycles, and it prepared people for the fragile light of dawn, which would return predictably, like a reward for enduring the night. When we think of darkness today, we often romanticize it. We imagine cozy candlelight, gentle night skies, or peaceful sleep. But for ancient humans, darkness was a force to navigate, respect, and adapt to. It was the stage upon which life played out after sunset, a stage both dangerous and intimate, terrifying and strangely comforting. Understanding how people experienced nightfall reminds us that sleep is not just biological, it is environmental, cultural, and psychological. It is shaped by the world around us, by the dangers we face, and by the presence of others. In the absence of constant light, humans became deeply skilled at interpreting subtle signals, moving carefully, and negotiating the balance between rest and awareness. The coming of darkness was not passive, it was active. It defined behavior, shaped perception, and framed the human experience. Night was not just a pause from the day, it was a presence in itself. And in learning to live with it, ancient people developed resilience, social cohesion, and an intimate awareness of the fragile, beautiful, and sometimes frightening world around them. Once the sun had dipped beneath the horizon and darkness arrived, fire became everything. Not just warmth or a cooking tool, but a lifeline, a small circle of comfort in a vast, uncertain world. It was the line between safety and vulnerability, between awareness and oblivion. Firelight in antiquity was fragile. It did not illuminate rooms like our modern lamps, and it certainly did not chase away the night entirely. A small oil lamp could cast light across a table or a few steps in a room, but beyond that, shadows swallowed everything. A hearth fire could stretch a little further, perhaps to the corners of a main living space, but even then, darkness remained close, alive, and restless. Maintaining a fire required constant effort. Oil had to be pressed and stored carefully. Wicks needed trimming. Wood had to be chopped, dried, and stacked in advance. Every flame consumed resources that were often scarce. If the oil ran out, the fire dwindled. If embers were not banked properly, the night could arrive unexpectedly, and with it, vulnerability. People learned early that fire could fail, and they respected it accordingly. Imagine an evening in a small ancient home. The sun has vanished. Shadows cling to walls and furniture. A single oil lamp flickers near the hearth. Smoke curls upward, stinging eyes, leaving a thin layer of soot on walls and hair. The fire crackles, sending dancing light across faces, casting familiar objects into strange, distorted shapes. A hanging pot looks like a crouching animal. A child's toys become tiny, lurking figures. Even the safest spaces feel a little uncertain. Despite this, fire was comfort. Its glow drew families together. People gathered near it, not just for heat, but for reassurance. Its presence meant that the world beyond the circle of light, though dangerous, was negotiable. Conversation softened, movement slowed, and the rhythm of life adjusted to the fire's glow. Humor, too, found its place. Families would joke about shadows that looked like monsters, tease one another about tripping over objects unseen in the dim light, or laugh softly when a gust of wind nearly extinguished the lamp. The night was tense, yes, but people were inventive, adaptable, and sometimes absurdly resilient. The fire also shaped practical behavior. It dictated how people moved. Steps were deliberate. Familiarity with the room mattered. People memorized their surroundings and counted steps. A misplaced mat or a stray bucket could result in stubbed toes, bruises, or worse, in complete darkness. But these were ordinary risks, woven into the fabric of nightly life. Even when fire was available, its light could not erase vulnerability. Animals prowled beyond the home. Thieves or enemies moved unseen in villages. Fires could fail. The night was still alive and full of danger, pressing against human settlement. Vigilance was constant, even in rest. Sleep was lighter, more alert. People lay down with one ear tuned to the small noises that might indicate trouble. Fire's presence also fostered social life. Tasks were completed near the hearth. Repairing tools, preparing food, mending clothes. Conversations took place within its radius. Stories were told. Hushed laughter traveled in the flickering glow. The night, while threatening, became shared and structured around the firelight. Humans learned to coexist with darkness rather than attempting to banish it entirely. Interestingly, fire was not universally reliable. A sudden gust could snuff a flame. Oil could spill or burn out. The loss of fire brought instant vulnerability. Households learned to bank embers, to protect fire through the night, and to keep enough fuel for relighting. The ember became a symbol of survival. Watching it glow required attention, almost like a tiny, living companion. Firelight shaped imagination as well as behavior. Shadows dancing across walls inspired stories, myths, and rituals. People attributed movement in the dim light to spirits or supernatural forces. They recognized, consciously or not, that fire framed perception. Its flicker, its warmth, and its smell molded how humans experienced the night. It was both real and symbolic, practical and mystical. In some homes, fire served as a clock. When embers burned low, it was time to prepare for sleep. When flames were strong, tasks continued, conversation lingered, or storytelling extended. Humans adapted to the rhythm of fire, aligning activity, rest, and vigilance with its life cycle. The circle of light became a temporal guide, defining the pace of the night. Sleeping arrangements intertwined with fire. Families clustered near it. Children and elders alike relied on its warmth. Travelers huddled close to embers for comfort and protection. Even strangers shared space near firelight in inns or communal rooms. Proximity provided both reassurance and safety. Fire, in these cases, became a social as well as physical necessity. Fire also demanded attention, even as it allowed rest. Someone often stayed semi-alert to prevent disaster. Fires could spread rapidly. Roofs were often thatched. Sparks could ignite stored oil. Sleep required negotiation, partial rest, alertness, and readiness all at once. People learned to let their bodies relax while their minds monitored tiny shifts in flame, sound, or air. Humor threaded through these routines. People joked about the clumsiness of those moving near dim light, laughed at shadows mistaken for intruders, or teased children who tried to keep the fire alive with sticks too large for the hearth. Even under threat, life retained levity. The night was serious, yes, but humans adapted with creativity, patience, and subtle amusement. Fire also framed dreams. The last light seen before sleep shaped perception. Faces, walls, and ceilings appeared familiar in flickering glow, yet shadows teased the imagination. Dreams sometimes incorporated these images, carrying the interplay of light and dark into subconscious exploration. Fire and darkness together created a world both tangible and surreal. Most nights, the flame was the final companion before sleep. Embers banked, fuel prepared, family gathered, people lay down with awareness of risk and comfort, light and shadow. Sleep could begin, segmented or deep, while fire lingered as guardian and witness. Fire did not defeat the night. It did not make darkness safe or predictable. It was a negotiation, a small victory, and a reminder of human ingenuity. Its glow was both comforting and fragile, practical and poetic, dangerous if mishandled, and essential for survival. In this delicate balance between firelight and darkness, humans found rhythm. They rested, adapted, and shared presence. Fire gave the night structure. It shaped perception, sleep, and social cohesion. And it reminded people, nightly, that life persisted even under the weight of shadow. As the night deepened and embers dimmed, humans prepared to surrender to sleep, aware of vulnerability, attentive to fire, and soothed by presence. The fragile light framed their bodies, dreams, and quiet reflection. And beyond the circle of illumination, darkness waited live, inscrutable, and ever-present. The night was not defeated, but humans, with fire and companionship, endured it. And in that endurance, sleep became possible. If you stepped into an ancient home at night, the first thing you'd notice might not even be a bed. The notion of a bedroom as we know it today was practically non-existent. Most people slept wherever it made sense, wherever warmth, safety, and space aligned. Sleep was practical, functional, communal, and sometimes a little uncomfortable. For the majority, sleeping took place on the floor. Packed earth, wooden planks, or stone slabs formed the base. Softness, if it existed at all, came from straw, reeds, animal skins, or thin mats. These makeshift surfaces did their job. They provided separation from cold or damp ground and gave some cushioning, but they were not indulgent. You slept to rest, not to luxuriate. Even in more affluent homes, beds were different from our modern expectation. Roman elites might have wooden frames, raised on legs or ropes, topped with straw or wool. Some might have feather-filled mattresses, but even then, beds were functional, not decorative sanctuaries. The luxury lay in elevation and warmth, not in fluff or personal space. A bed was a tool for sleep, not a retreat from life. Sleeping arrangements were rarely private. Families clustered together. Parents, children, and sometimes extended families slept in the same space. Proximity was essential for safety, comfort, and caregiving. Infants slept with mothers for warmth and quick attention. Older children slept near siblings, often with blankets or shared mats. Privacy was a rare luxury. Sleeping alone was unusual and even risky, because vulnerability increased in isolation. Beyond the household, communal sleep extended to inns, barracks, monasteries, and ships. Travelers shared floors, mats, or benches with strangers. Soldiers lay shoulder to shoulder on the same pallet or in rows on the floor. Sailors napped on decks or below cargo in confined spaces. Noise, movement, and close proximity were constants. Sleeping lightly was necessary. The body had to respond to sound, fire, or human movement. But sleep still came, in fragmented rhythms or brief windows, sufficient to restore energy. These arrangements shaped behavior. Movement had to be careful. People learned to navigate rooms in darkness, memorizing floor layouts and avoiding obstacles. Stubbing a toe on a bucket or tripping over a mat was normal. Even in small, familiar spaces, bodies and minds adapted to shifting light, uneven surfaces, and close quarters. Sleep required awareness, even in rest. Sleeping positions mattered. Flat on the back was less common. Side sleeping, slightly upright postures, or leaning against walls or hearths were preferred for comfort and health. Pillows existed, but they were small, firm and functional, often wood or stone, sometimes stuffed with straw. Their purpose was support, not luxury. Ancient sleep prioritized alignment, digestion, and practical restoration over softness. Firelight also shaped sleeping spaces. Families and communities clustered near hearths. Shared warmth dictated placement, proximity, and interaction. Even in larger homes, sleeping areas were organized around the fire, ensuring that at least some light reached resting bodies. The glow defined the night's geography, creating pockets of visibility amidst encroaching darkness. Animals often shared these spaces. Dogs, cats, or livestock slept nearby. They provided warmth, companionship, and alertness. Their presence added to the communal rhythm of sleep. The rustle of a tail, the shifting of paws, the low hum of breath. Humans and animals slept together, not as indulgence, but as practical adaptation. Despite the lack of privacy, sleep carried intimacy and social cohesion. People learned to rest while attuned to others' presence. The soft sigh of a sibling, the subtle movements of a spouse, the murmur of a child. Sleep was simultaneously individual and collective, allowing bodies to recharge while minds remained partially responsive. Even strangers could share space successfully. Inns and temporary lodgings forced cooperation and negotiation. Bodies adjusted to unfamiliar proximity, learned to tolerate noises, and accepted the rhythm of collective rest. Humor often accompanied these adjustments. Whispered complaints about snoring, playful nudges to avoid stepping on a neighbor, or quiet laughter at clumsy movements in dim firelight. The night was a mix of tension, practicality, and subtle amusement. Sleeping on the floor or close to others had health implications, too. Hard surfaces encouraged different postures and muscle adaptations. Shared spaces limited movement but fostered awareness. The body learned to respond to sound and vibration, creating a kind of low-level vigilance that modern solitary sleep rarely requires. Ancient sleep was both restorative and defensive. Sleep also varied by social status. Elites had some additional comfort: mattresses, raised beds, and sometimes separate rooms. But even they slept communally to some extent. Servants, guards, or children often remained in proximity, and doors were rarely thick enough to block sound entirely. Privacy was always relative, and vigilance remained part of the nighttime experience. Even in luxury, sleep was functional. It was influenced by light, sound, safety, and the body's natural rhythm. The goal was not uninterrupted comfort, but adequate restoration in a world where the night itself could be dangerous. This gave sleep a rhythm and structure that modern experiences lack. It was responsive, communal, and inseparable from its environment. The absence of rigid bedroom divisions also shaped culture. Sleep was intertwined with household and community life. It was social, practical, and adaptive. It was, in a sense, visible. Neighbors, family, and companions could share space, monitor risk, and offer comfort without speaking a word. This intimacy and awareness became part of the human experience of night. Through all these arrangements, humans adapted. The floor, the mats, the shared rooms, all were stages for survival and rest. People rested, moved, woke, and slept again, often in segmented patterns. They negotiated darkness, firelight, human presence, and the small comforts they could muster. Sleep was rarely perfect, but it worked. It allowed humans to endure nights that were longer, darker, and more unpredictable than most of us can imagine. In the end, sleeping spaces were not just locations, they were adaptations. They reflected culture, environment, and social structures. They shaped health, vigilance, and social cohesion. They framed dreams, stories, and reflection. And they prepared the body for the next day, ensuring that humans could continue to thrive in a world dominated by darkness and danger. Sleep, in this context, was neither passive nor purely private. It was an activity integrated with life, practical, communal, rhythmic, and alive. Every night, humans lay down in ways shaped by fire, light, companionship, and survival instincts. Every night, they rested with awareness, adapted to circumstance, and prepared for the unknown beyond the circle of warmth and flame. And in these humble arrangements and straw mats, on wooden planks near flickering firelight, surrounded by family, animals, or strangers, humans discovered the subtle mastery of sleep itself, to rest without surrendering entirely, to be vulnerable without being helpless, and to find rhythm in the fragile, shared darkness of the ancient night. As the night settles and our journey through antiquity comes to a close, we're reminded that sleep has always been a quiet, essential part of human life, long before modern schedules and glowing screens. The way people rested, woke, and embraced the darkness tells us so much about how they lived. If this calm look into the sleep habits of the ancient world helped you relax, please give the video a like. It truly supports the channel. I'd love to hear from you in the comments too. What part of ancient sleep surprised you the most? And if peaceful history is something you enjoy, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss future nighttime journeys into the past. Before you drift off, take a moment to explore the related videos on your screen for more soothing stories from history. Thank you for watching. Rest well, and I'll see you in the next one.